Arab millionaire helps abandoned woman with twins in the middle of the highway. And 2 days later, a man in a suit stopped at her house. Sarah Mitchell's trembling hands gripped the steering wheel of her old Honda Civic as she pulled over to the side of the desolate highway. The engine had finally given up, sputtering its last breath in the middle of nowhere, leaving her and her 2 children stranded in the darkness of the Arizona desert. The cold night air seeped through the car's worn-out frame, making 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Lucas huddle closer together in the back seat. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. Sarah caught her daughter's frightened expression in the rearview mirror, trying to muster a reassuring smile, despite the panic rising in her chest. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart," she responded, though uncertainty gnawed at her insides. Just hours ago, their lives had changed forever when Robert, her husband of 10 years, had abandoned them on this very highway. The memory of his cold eyes and cruel words still burned fresh in her mind. Sarah checked her phone again. No signal. They were truly alone, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but the vast desert stretching endlessly in both directions. The small amount of cash in her purse wouldn't last long, and their food and water supplies were limited. The reality of their situation began to sink in, heavy and suffocating. "Maybe we should start walking," Emma suggested, always the practical one, just like her mother. Sarah glanced at her watch, 9:30 p.m. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and walking along the highway at night with 2 young children seemed impossibly dangerous. Yet staying put might be even riskier. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She reached into the back seat and grabbed their emergency backpack, the one she'd always kept packed, somehow sensing that this day might come. "Okay, kids, we're going on an adventure," she announced, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "Emma, you're in charge of holding Lucas's hand. Lucas, you stay close to your sister, okay?" As they stepped out of the car, the desert wind whipped Sarah's dark hair across her face. She lifted Lucas onto her hip, knowing his little legs wouldn't carry him far. Emma clutched her mother's free hand, her small fingers ice cold with fear. They began walking along the highway's shoulder, their shadows stretching long and thin, under the occasional passing headlights. Each car that zoomed past without stopping made Sarah's heart sink a little lower. She had always prided herself on being independent, on never needing anyone's help. But now, with her children's lives at stake, she would have to swallow her pride. The minutes stretched into hours as they trudged forward. Lucas had fallen asleep on her shoulder, his warm breath against her neck the only comfort in this nightmare. Emma walked silently beside her, showing a strength that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. At just 8 years old, her daughter was already learning one of life's hardest lessons. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. Sarah's mind wandered to the life they'd left behind in California. The beautiful house she'd made a home, the law school dreams she'd abandoned for Robert, the friends who had slowly drifted away as he isolated her more and more. The signs had been there all along, but she'd ignored them, telling herself that staying together for the children was the right thing to do. A distant memory surfaced, her mother's words on her wedding day. "Marriage shouldn't feel like a cage, Sarah." How right she had been, but her mother wasn't here anymore to help them, and Sarah had nowhere else to turn. The sound of an approaching vehicle caught her attention. Unlike the others, this one was slowing down. Through the darkness, she could make out the sleek silhouette of a luxury car, its headlights illuminating the road ahead like twin beacons of hope. Sarah's heart began to race. This could either be their salvation or their doom. The car came to a stop several yards ahead of them, its engine purring quietly in the night. Sarah instinctively pulled her children closer, ready to run if necessary. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, his expensive suit visible even in the dim light. "Do you need assistance?" a deep voice called out, its accent distinctly Middle Eastern. The man took a step forward, then stopped, seeming to sense their apprehension. The light from his car revealed his features. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with striking dark eyes and an air of quiet authority. Sarah hesitated, her protective instincts warring with their desperate situation. Emma tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, my feet hurt." The simple plea made Sarah's decision for her. Sometimes she realized, the bravest thing you can do is accept help when you need it most. The stranger introduced himself as Karim al-Rashid, his voice carrying both warmth and authority. "Please, let me help you," he said, maintaining a respectful distance. "It's dangerous to be walking along this highway at night, especially with children." Sarah studied him carefully, years of learned caution making her wary. But there was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding, perhaps even pain, that made her want to trust him. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she finally replied, "and these are my children, Emma and Lucas." "There's a town about 30 miles ahead," Karim said, gesturing toward the darkness. "I have a residence there. I can offer you shelter for the night, and tomorrow we can arrange for your car to be towed." He spoke with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems, yet there was nothing presumptuous in his manner. Emma, usually shy around strangers, stepped forward slightly. "Are you a king?" she asked, her eyes wide as she took in his elegant appearance. A ghost of a smile crossed Karim's face, the first crack in his composed exterior. "No, not a king," he replied softly. "Just someone who believes in helping others when they need it." Something in the way he said it suggested a deeper story, but Sarah was too exhausted to probe further. After a moment's more hesitation, she nodded. "Thank you. We would be grateful for your help." The relief of making a decision, any decision, swept through her like a wave. The interior of Karim's car was warm and luxurious, the leather seats cradling their tired bodies. Lucas didn't even stir as Sarah buckled him in, and Emma's eyes were already drooping as they pulled away from the shoulder. In the passenger seat, Sarah fought to stay alert, watching the desert landscape roll past through tinted windows. "May I ask what brought you to this situation?" Karim inquired quietly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The question was gentle, without pressure or judgment. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "My husband, ex-husband, he left us here. Just stopped the car and told us to get out." The words felt bitter in her mouth. I should have seen it coming. The control, the isolation, the anger, but I kept hoping things would change. Karim's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "Some men," he said after a long pause, "mistake power for strength." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with this truth. As they drove, the desert gave way to signs of civilization. Soon they were passing through gates that opened automatically, revealing a sprawling estate that made Sarah's breath catch. The house, no, palace was a better word, rose before them, its architecture a stunning blend of modern and traditional Middle Eastern design. "Welcome to Al-Rashid Manor," Karim said, pulling up to the front entrance where warm light spilled onto the circular driveway. An older woman in elegant traditional dress stood waiting at the top of the steps, her silver-streaked hair covered by a hijab. "This is Mrs. Fatima," Karim introduced as they approached. "She oversees the household." The woman's eyes were kind as she took in Sarah and her children, showing no surprise at their disheveled appearance. "I've had rooms prepared," Fatima said, her accent less pronounced than Karim's. "The children must be exhausted." She reached out to touch Emma's cheek with a gentle hand, and to Sarah's surprise, her normally reserved daughter didn't pull away. As they followed Fatima inside, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the grand foyer with its soaring ceilings and intricate tilework. Yet, despite the obvious luxury, there was something almost melancholy about the space, as if it were too big, too empty. "Rest now," Karim said, preparing to take his leave. "Tomorrow we can discuss your next steps." He hesitated, then added, "You're safe here, Mrs. Mitchell. I give you my word." Later, lying in a bed more comfortable than any she'd ever known, Sarah stared at the ornate ceiling. Emma and Lucas slept peacefully in connecting rooms, their soft breathing audible through the open doors. The events of the day felt surreal, like something from a dream or perhaps a fairy tale. But as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Karim al-Rashid than met the eye. The sadness she'd glimpsed beneath his composed exterior, the way he'd understood without her having to explain. These were the marks of someone who carried his own hidden burdens. In the quiet of the night, the vast house seemed to hold its breath, keeping its secrets close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions. But for now, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Dawn broke over Al-Rashid Manor, painting the desert sky in hues of pink and gold. Sarah stood at the window of her temporary room, watching the sun rise over the carefully manicured gardens below. The events of the previous night felt almost dreamlike in the morning light, but the luxurious surroundings confirmed their reality. A soft knock at the door preceded Fatima's entrance. The older woman carried a tray laden with breakfast and what smelled like freshly brewed Arabic coffee. "Good morning, my dear," she said warmly. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in years," Sarah admitted, helping Fatima set the tray on a small table. "The children? Still sleeping peacefully. They've been through quite an ordeal." Fatima's dark eyes studied Sarah with motherly concern. "As have you." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of voices drifted up from the garden below. She glanced out to see Karim walking with a group of men in business suits, their conversation animated but too distant to hear clearly. Even from above, she could sense the tension in his bearing. "The morning business meeting," Fatima explained, following her gaze. "Mr. Al-Rashid's company is going through changes." Something in her tone suggested these changes weren't entirely welcome. Sarah watched as Karim suddenly stopped walking, his attention caught by something in the garden. Following his line of sight, she saw a small playground seemingly untouched, with a single swing moving gently in the morning breeze. For a moment, Karim stood completely still, lost in thought, before one of his associates drew his attention back to their discussion. "There are stories in every corner of this house," Fatima said quietly, beginning to pour the coffee. "Some of them waiting to be told, others better left in silence." She handed Sarah a delicate cup. Mr. Al-Rashid wasn't always so reserved. Time and circumstance have made him who he is today. The smell of cardamom from the coffee filled the room as Sarah absorbed this information. "Last night, when he found us on the highway, he could have simply called for help or given us money for a hotel. Why bring complete strangers into his home?" Fatima's expression softened. "Perhaps he saw something familiar in your situation, something that spoke to his own experiences." She paused, choosing her words carefully. 5 years ago, there was another family here, a mother and daughter seeking shelter from a difficult situation. Amira, the little girl, she brought light back into this house. She and Mr. Al-Rashid formed a special bond. "What happened to them?" Sarah asked, though something in Fatima's expression made her heart sink. "They moved away suddenly. The mother had family in another country." Fatima's voice held a note of old pain. "Mr. Al-Rashid never spoke of them again, but the playground remains, untouched." Their conversation was interrupted by the patter of small feet as Emma and Lucas burst into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Mommy, have you seen the garden? There's a fountain with fish in it," Emma exclaimed, "and a playground," Lucas added, bouncing on his toes. Sarah forced a smile, pushing away the weight of Fatima's story. "After breakfast, we can explore a little, but remember, we're guests here, so we need to be on our best behavior." As the children settled in to eat, Sarah's mind wandered to her own situation. She needed to find work, a place to live, some way to rebuild their lives. The thought of returning to law school seemed like an impossible dream now, but perhaps— "There's a small restaurant in town, the Cedar Grove," Fatima mentioned as if reading her thoughts. "The owner, Yasmin, is looking for help. She's a friend of mine. I could speak with her if you're interested." Before Sarah could respond, another knock came at the door. This time it was Ahmad, Karim's personal assistant, his manner precise and formal. "Mr. Al-Rashid would like to speak with you in his study, Mrs. Mitchell. At your convenience, of course." Sarah glanced at her children, but Fatima immediately understood. "The children and I will visit the fish in the fountain. Take your time." Following Ahmad through the winding corridors of the manor, Sarah couldn't help but notice the whispers and curious glances from other staff members. Clearly, her presence in the house was causing quite a stir. The study, when they reached it, was a magnificent room lined with books and featuring a vast desk of dark wood. Karim stood at the window, his back to the door, still dressed in his business suit despite the early hour. When he turned to face her, Sarah was struck again by the intensity of his gaze and something else, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his powerful presence. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his formality. "Sarah, we need to discuss your situation and perhaps a proposition I'd like to make." Sarah sat in one of the leather chairs facing Karim's desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet. Karim remained standing, his expression thoughtful as he considered his next words. "Your car has been towed to the best mechanic in town," he began. "Unfortunately, the repair estimate isn't promising. It would cost more to fix than the vehicle is worth." Sarah's heart sank. The car had been their last real asset, their means of starting over somewhere new. "I see," she managed to say, her mind already racing to find solutions. "I have a proposal for you," Karim continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Stay here, at the manor, until you can get back on your feet. There's plenty of space, and it would give you time to make proper plans for your future." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken implications. "That's very generous," Sarah began carefully, "but I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," Karim interrupted, finally taking his seat behind the desk. "In fact, you might be doing me a favor. This house, it's too quiet. Your children bring a life to it that has been missing for too long." Something in his voice made Sarah think of the playground she'd seen earlier, and Fatima's story about the little girl named Amira. "Mr. Al-Rashid." "Karim, please." "Karim," she corrected herself. "Why are you really doing this? Surely there must be charitable organizations, women's shelters." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Sometimes, Mrs. Mitchell, the right thing to do isn't the logical thing. I found you on that highway for a reason. Perhaps it's time for both of us to trust in something beyond logic." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. The door burst open, revealing a striking woman in expensive designer clothing, her perfect makeup unable to hide her fury. "So the rumors are true," the woman spat in Arabic, her eyes fixing on Sarah with undisguised contempt. "You're harboring another charity case, Karim." Karim rose smoothly to his feet, his expression hardening. "Dalal, I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "Your future wife doesn't need an appointment," Dalal replied in English, clearly for Sarah's benefit. She stalked into the room, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Have you forgotten our arrangement? What will the board think when they hear about this woman living in your house?" Sarah stood, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "I should go." "Stay," Karim commanded softly, then turned to Dalal. "Our engagement was broken 3 years ago by mutual agreement. As for the board, my personal life is not their concern." Dalal laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Everything you do is their concern now, Habibi. Or have you forgotten the conditions of your father's will? The company can only remain under your control if you maintain the family's reputation. And this," she gestured dismissively at Sarah, "will not help your case." Sarah watched the interaction with growing understanding. The tension she'd witnessed in the morning's business meeting, the whispers among the staff. Everything was connected to this woman and whatever power she held over Karim's position. "My father's will," Karim said quietly, "also stipulated that I should lead with honor and compassion. I intend to honor both requirements." Dalal's perfectly painted lips curved into a cruel smile. "We'll see about that. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. I suggest you think very carefully about your choices between now and then." With a final contemptuous glance at Sarah, she swept out of the room. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. Sarah stared at the door, her mind whirling with implications. "I can't stay here," she said finally. "I won't be the cause of you losing your company." Karim moved from behind his desk, coming to stand before her. "The company is already at risk," he admitted. "My father built an empire on traditional values and connections. Since his passing, there have been those who think I'm too progressive in my business approach. Dalal's family holds significant influence with the board. They've been looking for a reason to force me out. Then why risk everything to help us? His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because some things are worth the risk. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. 5 years ago, I made a different choice. I let fear of scandal and social pressure drive away someone who needed my help. I've regretted it every day since. Sarah thought of the empty playground, of Fatima's sad eyes when she spoke of Amira. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture of loss and regret that mirrored her own. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah and her children arrived at Al Rashid Manor. The Cedar Grove restaurant, where Fatima had helped her secure a position, turned out to be a charming establishment nestled in the heart of the local community. The owner, Yasmin, was a warm-hearted woman who had immediately taken Sarah under her wing. "You're a natural," Yasmin commented one busy afternoon, watching Sarah gracefully handle a demanding table of local businessmen. "The customers love you." Sarah smiled, carefully balancing a tray of traditional Middle Eastern desserts. The work was demanding but satisfying, and most importantly, it gave her a sense of independence she hadn't felt in years. Emma and Lucas spent their days at the manor's library, with a tutor Karim had arranged, and for the first time since their ordeal, they seemed truly happy. "Sarah," Yasmin called as the dinner rush wound down, "there's someone here to see you." Looking up from the table she was clearing, Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she saw Michael Crawford standing in the doorway. He was an old friend from her law school days, now a successful attorney in the area. They had reconnected by chance when he'd visited the Cedar Grove last week. "Michael, what brings you here?" Sarah asked, approaching him with a warm smile. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he replied, his blue eyes serious. "About wanting to return to law school someday. Well, I might have a solution." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "There's a paralegal position opening up at my firm. The hours would work around your current schedule, and the firm offers tuition assistance for employees pursuing law degrees." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took the folder. It seemed almost too good to be true, a chance to revive her old dreams. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Michael smiled, touching her arm gently. "You're too talented to spend your life serving tables, Sarah. You know that." From across the restaurant, Yasmin watched the interaction with knowing eyes. After Michael left, she approached Sarah with a meaningful look. "He likes you, you know. I can tell." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "We're just old friends." Yasmin hummed skeptically. "And what about Mr. Al-Rashid? I've seen the way he looks at you when he comes in for lunch." "That's complicated," Sarah sighed, remembering the growing tension between them. Since Dalal's confrontation, in his study, Karim had become more distant, though she often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Later that evening, as Sarah walked through the manor's gardens with Emma and Lucas, she found herself drawn to the abandoned playground. The children had already claimed it as their own, bringing life back to the silent swings and slides. "Push me higher, Mummy," Lucas called from the swing, his laughter echoing across the garden. As she pushed her son, Sarah noticed Karim standing on his balcony, watching them. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, but not before she caught the flash of pain in his expression. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah wandered down to the manor's kitchen for a glass of water. To her surprise, she found Fatima there, preparing what smelled like traditional Arabic coffee. "Ah, perfect timing," the older woman smiled. "Join me." Sometimes the quiet hours are the best time for conversation. They sat at the kitchen island, the aromatic coffee between them. "I saw Michael Crawford at the restaurant today," Fatima mentioned casually. "He seems like a good man." Sarah nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "He is. He's offered me a job at his law firm. And yet you don't seem entirely happy about it. I should be, shouldn't I?" Sarah stared into her coffee. "It's everything I wanted. A chance to restart my career, provide a better future for my children, but your heart is pulling you in another direction," Fatima finished gently. Before Sarah could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Karim appeared in the doorway, stopping short when he saw them. He was still dressed in his business clothes, though his tie was loosened and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "I apologize for interrupting," he said formally. "I was working late and thought I heard voices." "Join us," Fatima insisted, already reaching for another cup. "You work too hard these days." Something in the domesticity of the scene, the three of them sharing coffee in the quiet kitchen, made Sarah's heart ache. This place had become more than just a temporary shelter. It had begun to feel like home. "The board meeting is tomorrow," Karim said after a moment of comfortable silence. "Dalal's family has been busy gathering support for their position." "Which is?" Sarah asked quietly. "They want to restructure the company, to make it more traditional." His lips twisted slightly. "Remove what they see as destabilizing influences. Like helping stranded families on highways?" Sarah attempted to joke, but her voice wavered. Karim's eyes met hers across the kitchen. "Island. Like following one's heart instead of tradition," he replied softly. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, but tension hung heavy in the air at Al Rashid Manor. Sarah watched from her window as Karim's car disappeared down the driveway, his future, and by extension hers, hanging in the balance. "Mom!" Emma's voice drew her attention. Her daughter stood in the doorway, already dressed for school. "Are we going to have to leave?" Sarah's heart clenched at the worry in her child's voice. "Come here, sweetheart." She pulled Emma into a tight hug. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together, just like we always have." At the Cedar Grove, Sarah threw herself into work, trying to keep her mind off the board meeting. Michael stopped by for lunch, his presence a reminder of the decision she needed to make about the paralegal position. "The deadline for accepting the job is Friday," he reminded her gently. "Sarah, I know you're worried about making such a big change, but think about what this could mean for your future." "It's not that simple, Michael," Sarah sighed, refilling his coffee cup. "The children are finally settling in here. They're happy." "They could be happy anywhere," Michael argued. "And I would be here to help you, you know that, right?" His hand covered hers on the coffee pot, the gesture intimate and full of promise. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Dalal entering the restaurant, followed by two elegantly dressed women. Their eyes met across the room, and Dalal's painted lips curved into a triumphant smile. "Mrs. Mitchell," she called out, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "How fortunate to find you here. I thought you should be the first to know. The board meeting went exactly as planned." Sarah's hand trembled under Michael's as Dalal approached their table. "What do you mean?" "Karim has been temporarily relieved of his position as CEO," Dalal announced, clearly savoring each word. "The board feels he needs time to reevaluate his priorities. Of course, this means certain changes will have to be made regarding his household arrangements." Michael stood up, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "Are you threatening her?" Dalal's eyes flickered to their joined hands with amusement. "Not at all. I'm simply informing Mrs. Mitchell that her presence at Al Rashid Manor is no longer appropriate. The board is very concerned about maintaining proper appearances. She can't just throw you out," Michael said after Dalal had left, her mission of destruction accomplished. "There must be some legal recourse." "No," Sarah interrupted, finally pulling her hand away. "She's right. I can't stay there anymore. Not if it means making things worse for Karim." The rest of her shift passed in a blur. When she finally returned to the manor that evening, she found Fatima waiting for her in the foyer, her usually serene face troubled. "He's in the garden," the older woman said simply. "He needs you, even if he won't admit it." Sarah found Karim by the fountain, his suit jacket discarded, his shoulders bearing the weight of the day's events. He turned at the sound of her approach, and the raw emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "I suppose Dalal told you," he said quietly. "She did." Sarah moved to stand beside him, watching the play of water in the fountain. "I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow." "The job at Michael's firm—" "Don't." The word came out sharp, almost desperate. Karim ran a hand through his hair, composing himself. "Don't make any decisions yet, please." "But the board has suspended me for 3 months," he interrupted. "They want me to prove that I can lead the company in a way that honors my father's legacy." His laugh was bitter. As if my father's true legacy was about profits and appearances, rather than helping those in need. Sarah thought about the playground, about Amira, about all the pain and regret that had led them to this moment. "What will you do?" Karim turned, to face her fully, his eyes intense. "5 years ago, I let fear of scandal and social pressure drive away someone who needed my help. I've lived with that regret every day since. I won't make the same mistake again. Even if it costs you everything? Some things are worth more than money or power." His hand reached out, hesitating just short of touching her face. "Sarah, A sudden crash from the direction of the playground interrupted whatever he was about to say. They turned to see Lucas standing amid a scattered collection of garden tools, his small face scared but determined. "I was trying to fix the swing," he explained as they hurried over, "like Mr. Karim fixes things." Sarah knelt to check him for injuries, but Karim was already there, gathering the child into his arms with a gentleness that made her heart twist. "The swing doesn't need fixing, little one," he said softly. "It was just waiting for the right person to use it again." The news of Karim's suspension spread through the local community like wildfire. At the Cedar Grove, Sarah couldn't escape the whispers and pointed looks from customers who had pieced together her connection to the Al-Rashid family drama. Yasmin did her best to shield her from the worst of it, but the weight of public scrutiny was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. "You shouldn't let them bother you," Yasmin said one morning, watching Sarah wipe down tables with more force than necessary. "People always talk. Tomorrow they'll find something else to gossip about." "It's not just the gossip," Sarah replied, straightening up. "Every time I walk into that manor, I feel like I'm making things worse for him. Maybe Dalal is right. Maybe I should just—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Fatima's voice interrupted. The older woman stood in the doorway of the restaurant, her presence commanding respect despite her small stature. "Come with me, both of you. There's something you need to see." Curious, Sarah and Yasmin followed Fatima through the quiet morning streets. Their destination turned out to be a small building tucked away in one of the older parts of town. A sign above the door read, "Al-Rashid Women's Center," in both English and Arabic. "What is this place?" Sarah asked as Fatima unlocked the door. "This was Karim's mother's dream," Fatima explained, leading them inside. "A place where women could come for help, education, legal advice, whatever they needed to build better lives for themselves and their children." The interior was dusty but well maintained, with comfortable furniture and several small offices. On one wall hung a large photograph of a beautiful woman with Karim's eyes, standing proudly in front of the building on what appeared to be its opening day. "Amira loved it here," Fatima continued softly. "She and her mother stayed in one of the apartments upstairs while they got back on their feet. Karim would visit almost every day, bringing books and toys. For a while it seemed like he was finally healing from his own losses." "What happened?" Yasmin asked, though her expression suggested she already knew parts of the story. "The board happened?" Fatima's voice hardened. "They said it wasn't a proper use of company resources, that it sent the wrong message about the family's values. Karim's father had always protected the center, but after his passing—" She trailed off, running a hand along a dusty desk. "Karim was forced to choose between keeping the center open and maintaining control of the company his father had built. He chose the company, believing he could do more good from a position of power. And Amira," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Her mother couldn't bear to stay after the center closed. They left for Europe, where her family lived. Karim has kept this place exactly as it was, paying for its maintenance from his personal accounts. I think he's been waiting for the right moment, the right person to bring it back to life." Sarah walked slowly through the space, imagining it full of life and purpose. Her fingers traced the spines of law books on a shelf. Books that could have helped someone like her understand her rights, fight back against abuse. "The paralegal position at Michael's firm," she said slowly, "it would give me the legal knowledge to help other women, to make sure they know their options, their rights." "Yes," Fatima agreed, "but there are many ways to help, my dear. And sometimes the hardest path is the one we're meant to take." The sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Sarah saw Karim stepping out of his vehicle, his expression darkening with concern when he noticed them inside the building. "I should have known you'd bring her here," he said to Fatima as he entered, though there was no real anger in his voice. "She needed to understand," Fatima replied simply, "and so did you." The tension in the room was palpable as Karim and Sarah's eyes met. Yasmin quietly tugged on Fatima's sleeve, and the two women slipped outside, leaving them alone. "I've been trying to protect you," Karim said finally, breaking the silence. "From the gossip, from the board's prejudices, from my own." He stopped, struggling with words that seemed to cost him dearly. "Your own what?" Sarah prompted gently. "My own feelings." The admissions seemed to exhaust him. "I told myself I was just helping someone in need, being the kind of man my parents raised me to be. But the truth is, from the moment I saw you on that highway, something inside me recognized you. Not just your situation, but you." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as Karim moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I keep telling myself to let you go," he continued, "to accept Michael's offer, build a safe, respectable life away from all this complexity. But every time I try—" "I feel it too," Sarah whispered, finally giving voice to the truth they'd both been dancing around. "This connection, this pull. But Karim, your company, your position mean nothing without purpose," he finished. "My father built this company to help people, to make a difference in their lives. Somewhere along the way I lost sight of that. But you—" His hand rose to cup her cheek, the touch sending electricity through her body. "You reminded me of who I'm supposed to be." The peaceful moment in the women's center was shattered by the sudden arrival of Ahmad, Karim's assistant, bursting through the door with uncharacteristic urgency. "Mr. Al-Rashid, you need to see this immediately." He thrust a tablet into Karim's hands, and Sarah watched as his face darkened while reading whatever was on the screen. "When did this go live?" 20 minutes ago. "See, it's already trending locally." Sarah peered at the screen and felt her blood run cold. It was a local news website, and there on the front page was a photo of her and Karim in the garden, his hand reaching toward her face in an intimate gesture. The headline read, "Al-Rashid heirs latest scandal, the truth behind his suspension." "There's more," Ahmad said grimly, scrolling down to reveal another article. This one featured old photos of Sarah with Robert, her ex-husband, along with court records and police reports that should have been sealed. The story painted her as a gold digger with a history of troubled relationships, implying she had orchestrated her encounter with Karim on the highway. "How did they get these records?" Sarah whispered, her hands shaking. "They were supposed to be sealed." "Dalal's family has connections in the legal system." Karim's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They're trying to force my hand." As if on cue, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from the board chairman. Karim answered it on speaker, his jaw set. "Abdullah, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain, Karim." The chairman's voice was grave. "Emergency board meeting in 1 hour. Your presence is required, and your decision about Mrs. Mitchell's future residence should be made clear by then." The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. The carefully constructed peace they'd built over the past weeks was crumbling around them. "I'll pack our things," she said quietly, already turning toward the door. "We can be out of the manor by tonight." "No." Karim's voice was firm as he caught her arm. "Running away is exactly what they want. It's what I did 5 years ago, and I've regretted it every day since. But your company is nothing without integrity." His eyes blazed with a determination she hadn't seen before. "My father built this company on the principle of helping others, of making a difference in people's lives. If I have to choose between that legacy and appeasing a board that's forgotten our true purpose, then it's not really a choice at all." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. "I can't let you sacrifice everything for us." "You're not letting me do anything," he smiled softly. "You've given me the courage to do what I should have done years ago." He turned to Ahmad, who had been quietly watching their exchange. "Call our lawyers. It's time to implement Operation Phoenix." Ahmad's eyes widened. "Are you sure? Once we start this, there's no going back. I'm sure. Karim's voice was steady. And contact Amira's mother in London. Tell her it's time to come home. As Ahmad hurried away, Sarah looked at Karim questioningly. Operation Phoenix? A contingency plan my father put in place before he passed, Karim explained, leading her back into the women's center. He knew there might come a day when the board's values no longer aligned with our family's true mission. He left me with a choice: maintain control of the company by their rules, or trigger a clause that would restructure everything. What kind of restructure? One that would return the company to its original purpose, helping people. He gestured around the women's center. This place, and others like it, were never meant to be side projects. They were supposed to be the heart of what we do. Sarah's mind was spinning with possibilities, but the board won't have a say. Karim's smile held a hint of satisfaction. The restructure would transform our major holdings into a non-profit foundation, with a new board selected based on humanitarian credentials rather than business connections. Dalal's family would lose their influence overnight. They'll fight it. Of course they will. But my father made sure the legal framework was ironclad. He took her hands in his touch grounding her in the chaos of the moment. Sarah, I know this isn't what you signed up for. The media attention, the scandal, it's going to get worse before it gets better. If you want to accept Michael's offer, build a quieter life. Sarah thought about the paralegal position waiting for her, the safe, respectable future it promised. Then she looked around the women's center, imagining it full of life again, imagining herself using her legal knowledge to help others who had been in her situation. When Robert left us on that highway, she said slowly, I thought it was the end of everything. But maybe it was just the beginning. The next 48 hours at Al Rashid Manor passed in a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers came and went, carrying stacks of documents and speaking in hushed tones. Sarah watched from the sidelines. As Karim orchestrated what amounted to a complete revolution of his family's business empire. The foundation's bylaws are ironclad, his lead attorney confirmed during a late-night meeting in the study. Your father's provisions are clear. The transformation can be triggered at your discretion, and once initiated, it cannot be reversed. Sarah sat beside Karim, their shoulders touching. As he signed document after document, each signature felt like another brick in the wall they were building against their opponents. The media circus outside the manor gates had grown, with reporters camping out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the scandal that was rocking the local business world. Emma and Lucas had taken to the situation with surprising resilience. Are we really going to help other families like us? Emma had asked when Sarah explained the changes happening around them. The hope in her daughter's eyes had confirmed Sarah's conviction that they were on the right path. The real surprise came the next morning when Yasmin arrived at the manor, armed with a stack of papers of her own. The Cedar Grove isn't just a restaurant, she revealed, spreading the documents across Karim's desk. It was one of your mother's first projects, a place where women could work, learn business skills, support themselves. Karim's eyes widened as he examined the old documents. I had no idea. Your mother was clever, Yasmin smiled. She knew some of the board members wouldn't approve of her more progressive initiatives, so she disguised them as traditional businesses. The Cedar Grove, the boutique on Main Street, even the small publishing house, they're all part of a network designed to help women become independent. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. So when Fatima helped me get the job at the restaurant, she was following a tradition started by your mother. Yasmin nodded at Karim. Every woman who works at the Cedar Grove has a story similar to yours. We've been keeping her legacy alive quietly all these years. The revelation seemed to energize Karim. He spent the next several hours on the phone, reaching out to other businesses his mother had established, uncovering a network of support and empowerment that had been operating beneath the surface of his father's more visible empire. But their opponents weren't going down without a fight. That afternoon, Dalal arrived at the manor, this time accompanied by her father, Sheikh Hassan, and several board members. You're making a terrible mistake, Sheikh Hassan warned, his voice carrying years of authority. This restructuring will undo generations of careful business building. And for what? To help this American woman and her children? To help all women and children who need it, Karim corrected firmly. To return to the true purpose of our family's wealth and influence. Your father would be ashamed, Dalal spat. But Sarah noticed the uncertainty in her eyes. The carefully constructed world she had thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers. My father, Karim responded calmly, left me these options for a reason. He knew there might come a time when we needed to choose between profit and purpose. The board will fight this, Sheikh Hassan threatened. We'll tie it up in courts for years. You can try, Sarah found herself speaking up, drawing on her old legal knowledge. But from what I understand of the documents, any legal challenge would only accelerate the transformation. The publicity would force you to explain why you're fighting against a charitable foundation. The Sheikh's eyes narrowed as he studied her. You're not what I expected, he said finally. When Dalal told me about the woman Karim had taken in, I imagined a helpless victim. Sarah met his gaze steadily. That's the problem with assumptions, Your Excellency. They blind us to the truth in front of us. A strange expression crossed the older man's face, something almost like respect. He turned to Karim. Your mother would have liked her, he said quietly, then more formally. The board will need time to consider these developments. After they left, Sarah found Karim standing by the window, watching their cars disappear down the driveway. That went better than expected, she offered. Sheikh Hassan was one of my father's oldest friends, Karim replied thoughtfully. Before the younger generation took over the board, he was known for his charitable works. Perhaps he's been waiting for someone to remind him of that. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ahmad, practically bouncing with excitement. Sir, they've landed. Amira and her mother's flight just touched down. They'll be here within the hour. Sarah watched as emotions played across Karim's face. Hope, fear, anticipation. She squeezed his hand. It's time to heal old wounds, she said softly. Together? He asked. And in that one word was every question about their future. Together, she confirmed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. The reunion with Amira and her mother Layla was both joyful and bittersweet. The little girl Sarah had heard so much about was now a poised teenager, but her eyes still lit up with the same warmth when she saw Karim. She rushed into his arms the moment she entered the manor, 5 years of separation dissolving in an instant. You've grown so tall, Karim managed, his voice thick with emotion. And you finally learned to smile again, Amira replied, glancing meaningfully at Sarah and the children. Emma and Lucas watched the scene with fascination, especially when Amira turned to them with a friendly grin. Want to see the secret hideout I made in the garden when I lived here? As the children ran off together, Layla approached Karim more cautiously. When we received your message, I wasn't sure we should come, she admitted. But Amira, since she never gave up hope that someday we would return. I should have fought harder to keep you here, Karim replied. Should have stood up to the board sooner. We all make choices based on what we believe is right at the time, Layla said gently. The important thing is learning from them. She turned to Sarah with a warm smile. And sometimes life gives us second chances to make things right. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as news of the Al-Rashid Foundation's creation spread through the community. To everyone's surprise, Sheikh Hassan emerged as one of their strongest supporters, using his influence to bring other board members to their side. My wife has been talking my ear off about it, he confided to Karim during a strategy meeting. She says it's about time we return to the values that made this family great in the first place. Even Dalal seemed to be reconsidering her position, especially after spending time with Amira, who remembered her fondly from years ago. The teenager had a way of breaking down barriers, helping people remember who they used to be before ambition and fear got in the way. The Women's Center was the first project to be revitalized under the new foundation. Sarah found herself working, alongside Layla, who had managed similar centers in London, to modernize and expand its services. Her legal knowledge, though rusty, proved invaluable in setting up the support systems they would offer. You know, Michael said when he visited to offer his firm's pro bono services to the center, this isn't exactly what I had in mind when I offered you that paralegal position, but I have to admit, you've found your calling. Sarah smiled, watching as Emma helped Amira show some new arrivals around the center. Her daughter had bloomed in the past weeks, finding her own way to contribute to their growing community. Even Lucas had appointed himself official greeter, welcoming every new family with the same enthusiasm that had first endeared him to Karim. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Conservative elements in the community still whispered about the impropriety of it all, and some business partners needed convincing that the foundation's new direction wouldn't affect their bottom line. But with each successful project, each family helped, each woman empowered, the whispers grew quieter. One evening, Sarah found Karim in his study, looking through old photographs. One showed his parents at the opening of the first women's center, their faces glowing with pride and purpose. Another captured a much younger Karim with his mother, planting trees in what would become the Manners Garden. "They would be so proud of you," Sarah said softly, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Of us," he corrected, pulling her around to face him. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't shown up on that highway and reminded me of who I was meant to be." "Funny how life works out," she mused. "When Robert abandoned us, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen. Instead, it led us here." Speaking of here, Karim reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been waiting for the right moment to ask you something." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as he opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, elegant yet understated, perfectly matching her personality. But it was the love in his eyes, not the ring, that brought tears to her own. "Sarah Mitchell," he began, "you walked into my life on a dark desert highway and brought light back to my world. You helped me remember who I am and what truly matters. Will you—" A chorus of excited squeals interrupted his carefully planned speech. They turned to find Emma, Lucas, and Amira peeking around the study door, having obviously been eavesdropping. Fatima stood behind them, trying and failing to look stern about their intrusion. Sarah laughed through her tears. "I think we have an audience." "They're not the only ones," Karim smiled, nodding toward the door where Layla, Yasmin, and several other staff members had gathered, drawn by the children's excitement. "Well then," he continued, still on one knee, "I suppose this is fitting. Our story has never been just about us, has it? It's about family, the one we're born into and the one we choose. So, in front of all these witnesses, Sarah, will you marry me?" The answer was in her kiss, in the cheers that erupted around them, in the way Lucas launched himself into their embrace while Emma and Amira danced around them. It was in Fatima's tears and Layla's knowing smile, in the way their gathered family celebrated not just a proposal, but the healing of old wounds and the promise of new beginnings. The autumn breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the gardens of Al Rashid Manor as preparations for the wedding reached their final stages. In the 6 months since Karim's proposal, the foundation had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, touching lives across the community and beyond. Sarah stood in what had once been the Manor's formal dining room, now transformed into a meeting space for the foundation's board of directors. The walls, once adorned with austere portraits, now displayed photos of the families they'd helped and the communities they'd transformed. "The latest report from the Women's Center is impressive," Sheikh Hassan commented, reviewing the documents before him. The older man had become one of their strongest advocates, using his influence to open doors that had once seemed firmly closed. 23 women completed the business training program this month alone, and 15 of them have already started their own small businesses, Layla added proudly. She had taken charge of the education programs, bringing her years of experience from London to enhance their offerings. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from that desperate night on the highway to where she stood now. She was no longer just a survivor but a leader, using her growing legal expertise to help other women navigate their paths to independence. The sound of children's laughter drew her to the window. In the garden, Emma and Amira were helping Lucas practice his role as ring-bearer, while Fatima watched from her favorite bench. The 3 children had become inseparable, forming a bond that bridged cultures and healed old wounds. "They're natural teachers," Karim's voice came from behind her as his arms slipped around her waist, "just like their mother." Sarah leaned back into his embrace, savoring the moment of peace. "I had good examples to follow," she replied, thinking of all the strong women who had helped shape their foundation, Fatima, Layla, Yasmin, and even Dalal, who had surprised everyone by becoming one of their most effective fundraisers once. She redirected her competitive nature toward helping others. "Have you seen the latest designs for the new centers?" Karim asked, spreading blueprints across the table. The foundation was expanding, opening women's centers in other cities, each one built on the model that his mother had first envisioned. "They're perfect," Sarah said, tracing the outline of what would become safe spaces for women to rebuild their lives. "Your mother would be proud." "Our mothers," Karim corrected gently. "Yours taught you the strength and resilience that brought you to that highway. Without that, none of this would exist." Sarah turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar as her own. The weight of responsibility he'd carried for so long had been replaced by a sense of purpose that made him even more handsome. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "I've been ready since the moment I saw you standing on that highway," he replied, then grinned. "Though I'm not sure I'm prepared for all the traditional ceremonies Fatima has planned, she's determined to make this a wedding no one will forget." As if summoned by her name, Fatima appeared in the doorway. "There you are. The henna artist is waiting, and we haven't even started the pre-wedding rituals. Come, come." Sarah laughed as she was whisked away to begin the elaborate preparations that would transform her into a bride. The next several hours passed in a blur of traditional customs, each one steeped in meaning and love. That evening, as the sun set over the desert, Sarah found herself alone in the garden. The playground where this journey had begun was now full of life, just like the rest of the manor. New swings had been added alongside the old one, symbolizing the blending of past and present, of memories and new beginnings. "I thought I'd find you here," Emma's voice broke through her reverie. Her daughter, growing more perceptive each day, handed her a cup of Fatima's special tea. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "Not nervous, just grateful. When we started this journey, I was so scared about what would happen to us. I never imagined we'd find not just a home, but a purpose. And it's a big family," Emma added with a smile. "Lucas said we're the luckiest family because we got to choose each other. Even Amira says she always wanted a sister." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she held her daughter. From the manor came the sounds of last-minute wedding preparations, the mixing of languages and laughter that had become the soundtrack of their new life. Tomorrow would bring its own magic, but this moment, standing in the garden with her daughter surrounded by the evidence of dreams reborn and lives transformed, felt like its own kind of miracle. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the desert sun casting a golden glow over Al-Rashid Manor. The gardens had been transformed into an enchanted space where two cultures merged seamlessly. Delicate Arabic lanterns hung from the trees, their light mingling with cascades of white roses and jasmine. Sarah stood before the mirror in what had once been her temporary refuge and was now her permanent home. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of fusion design, combined traditional Western elegance with intricate Middle Eastern embroidery. Henna patterns adorned her hands, telling the story of two lives intertwined. "You look like a princess," Lucas declared, peeking into the room in his perfectly pressed suit. Emma and Amira followed, resplendent in their matching gowns, their faces glowing with excitement. "The guests are all seated," Fatima announced, entering with the final touches for Sarah's outfit. "And Karim," she smiled knowingly, "is as nervous as a schoolboy." The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of traditions performed in both English and Arabic. Under a canopy of flowers, with their children by their side, Sarah and Karim exchanged vows that spoke not just of love, but of purpose and shared vision. "When you found us that night," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "you didn't just save 3 lost souls. You reminded all of us that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply opening your heart to possibility." Karim's response brought tears to many eyes. "You taught me that true strength lies not in what we possess, but in what we're willing to give. You and the children brought life back to this house, purpose back to our family's legacy, and love back to my heart. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the garden erupted in celebration. Music filled the air, a joyous mixture of east and west that had the guests dancing well into the night. Even Sheikh Hassan was seen attempting to learn Western dance steps from Emma, while Dalal taught Lucas traditional Arabic moves. The reception was a testament to how far they'd come. Women from the Foundation's programs mingled with business leaders and community elders. Yasmin had outdone herself with the catering, the Cedar Grove's specialties taking pride of place alongside traditional Arabic delicacies. As the evening wore on, Sarah and Karim slipped away to their special spot by the playground. The old swing moved gently in the breeze, its chains now adorned with flowers. "I have something to show you," Karim said, leading her to a newly installed plaque near the garden's entrance. It read, "The Sarah and Amira Al-Rashid Foundation for Women and Children, where hope finds a home." Sarah's fingers traced the words, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "It's perfect," she whispered. "There's more," he smiled, pointing to the Foundation's mission statement below. "Founded on the belief that every ending is just a new beginning, and every person deserves the chance to write their own story." They were interrupted by the arrival of their children, all three of them, as Amira had officially become part of their family through adoption. The teenagers had their arms linked, while Lucas rode on Emma's hip, his eyes heavy with sleep, but still sparkling with joy. "The photographer wants one last family picture," Emma announced, "by the fountain." As they gathered for the photo, Sarah looked at the faces around her. Karim, her rock and partner in all things, Emma growing into a strong young woman with dreams of running the Foundation someday, Lucas, whose innocent love had helped heal, Karim's heart, and Amira, whose return had brought their family full circle. Behind them stood their extended family, Fatima, who had become a second mother to them all, Layla, whose courage in returning had paved the way for healing, Yasmin, whose friendship had provided a bridge between two worlds, and countless others who had become part of their story. The camera captured more than just a wedding portrait. It captured a moment of triumph over adversity, of love conquering, fear of family transcending boundaries. It captured the truth that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Later that night, as the last guests departed and the desert stars twinkled overhead, Sarah and Karim walked through their garden hand in hand. The path ahead was clear, not just for them, but for all the lives they would touch through their work. "Ready for our next adventure?" Karim asked, squeezing her hand. Sarah smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here and all the possibilities that lay ahead. "With you and our family beside me, always." And so their story continued, not with an ending, but with a new beginning, one that would ripple out to touch countless other lives, proving that love, when combined with purpose, has the power to transform not just two lives, but an entire community. In the quiet of the garden, the old swing moved gently in the desert breeze, no longer a symbol of loss, but a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges, and that every ended chapter is just the beginning of a beautiful new story.